What if the people you trusted most smiled at you while sliding papers across the table and told you it was just for convenience? Would you question them, or would you sign, believing love could never disguise betrayal? This is Evelyn's story. A mother, a widow, a woman who gave everything to her son, until one day she learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the hands you raise are the same hands that take everything away. It began on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Evelyn had baked a pie, the kind her late husband used to love, with apples sprinkled in cinnamon. The house smelled sweet, comforting, alive. When her son Michael and his wife Sarah arrived, they greeted her with hugs, smiling as they carried in a bottle of wine. They sat at the kitchen table, laughter weaving between sips of coffee and bites of pie. Evelyn basked in it, soaking up the warmth of family. She lived alone now, and these visits kept her going. Then, almost casually, Michael pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Mom," he began, his tone soft, careful. "There's something we'd like you to look over. Just paperwork. Nothing complicated." Evelyn blinked. "Paperwork?" Sarah leaned forward, her smile practiced, reassuring. "It's just some forms to help us handle things more smoothly. Bills, bank stuff, in case you ever get tired of dealing with it." Evelyn frowned slightly. "I've managed just fine all these years." "Of course you have," Michael said quickly, "but we just want to make things easier for you. Less stress. You've done enough, Mom. Let us carry some of the load." The words were coded in love. A son offering help, a daughter-in-law nodding along, eyes wide with sincerity. Evelyn hesitated, looking at the folder. Legal papers always made her nervous. She had trusted her husband to handle those things, but now she was alone. "Is it necessary?" she asked. "We'll take care of you, always." The warmth of that touch, the softness of their voices, Evelyn wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe her family would never deceive her. So she signed. Her hand trembled slightly as the pen scratched across the paper. Michael guided her through each page, pointing where to initial, where to date. She didn't read the fine print. The letters swam in her tired eyes. She trusted him. She trusted both of them. When it was done, Michael kissed her cheek. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." Evelyn smiled faintly, though unease prickled at her chest. She pushed it aside. Later, after they left, she stood in the quiet kitchen, the smell of apples still lingering in the air. She washed the dishes slowly, her mind replaying their words. "It's just for convenience. We'll take care of you." She wanted to believe it. She had to believe it, because if she didn't, then what had she just signed away? The first sign came 2 weeks later. Evelyn had gone to the grocery store on a Tuesday morning. She pushed her cart slowly down the aisles, choosing carefully. Oatmeal, coffee, a loaf of bread, apples for pie. At the checkout, she reached into her purse, pulled out her debit card, and slid it into the machine. Declined. The cashier, a young woman with kind eyes, tried again. "Maybe it's just the chip." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. She apologized, fumbling with the card. It declined again. "Would you like to try another form of payment?" the cashier asked gently. Evelyn opened her wallet. She had some cash, just enough. She handed it over with trembling fingers, then carried her bags to the car, her heart pounding. At home, she called Michael. "Mom, it's fine," he said smoothly. "The bank probably froze your card for security reasons. I'll take care of it. Don't worry." Relief trickled through her, though unease lingered. The second she had always paid it herself, but when she called the county office, the clerk told her cheerfully, Oh, Mrs. Carter, your son already handled that. He's listed as the primary on the account now. Primary? She set the phone down slowly, her pulse quickening. She hadn't remembered asking for that. When she asked Michael about it, he smiled patiently. Mom, remember the paperwork you signed? It just makes things easier. I'm taking care of these responsibilities for you. But I didn't ask you to, she said softly. He patted her hand. You don't need to worry anymore. Isn't that what you wanted? The question silenced her. Hadn't she wanted less stress? Hadn't she agreed to let them help? Still, something unsettled her. The way decisions were being made without her. The way her voice no longer seemed necessary. It was like a slow erosion. Pieces of her independence wearing away, small enough at first that she almost didn't notice. Then came the family dinner. Michael and Sarah had invited relatives over, cousins, aunts, even Sarah's parents. Evelyn baked her pie again, the same recipe that had always brought people together. But when she arrived, carrying it carefully in her hands, she found the table already full. Her place was missing. Oh, Mom, Sarah said lightly. We didn't think you'd want to sit through all the noise. We've set a small table for you in the den. Isn't that nicer? Quieter? The words were honey, but the sting was sharp. Evelyn forced a smile, though her chest ached as she carried the pie to the smaller table. From there, she could hear the laughter from the dining room, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation. She was in the house, but not part of it, present, but invisible. That night, lying awake in bed, she stared at the ceiling and whispered into the darkness. When did I stop belonging? The next morning, she stood by the window with her coffee, watching the street. The world outside carried on. Neighbors walking dogs, children racing on bicycles, the mail truck rumbling by. Her own life, though, felt as if it were shrinking. Every decision, every account, every gathering, slowly slipping out of her hands. And though no one had said the words aloud, she began to sense a truth she didn't want to face. Maybe those papers she had signed weren't just for convenience. Maybe they were the beginning of her disappearance. It started with a whisper Evelyn wasn't supposed to hear. She was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when Sarah's voice drifted from the living room. Do you think we should invite her? It might just be easier if we don't. Evelyn froze, sponge in hand, the suds dripping down her wrist. Michael's reply was softer, almost a murmur. Yeah, maybe it's best. You know how she gets. Her chest tightened. How I get. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the sink. When she stepped into the living room a minute later, they were smiling as if nothing had been said. Everything okay, Mom? Michael asked casually. Yes, she lied. But a week later, she found out the truth. It was Sunday afternoon. Evelyn had baked a cake, expecting her son and daughter-in-law to stop by. Instead, she saw the photos on social media, a family barbecue at Michael's house, dozens of relatives, laughter spilling from the pictures, Michael at the grill, Sarah smiling with a glass of wine, children running barefoot in the grass, and Evelyn? Nowhere. She scrolled slowly, her hands trembling. The comments read, "What a wonderful gathering," and "So glad everyone could be there." Everyone, it seemed, except her. Her throat ached as she set the phone down. She walked through her house in silence, the smell of the cake still hanging in the air, sweet and suffocating. Later that evening, she called Michael. I saw the pictures, she said, her voice barely. Lots of noise. I could have handled it, she whispered. Maybe next time, he said quickly. Don't take it personally. But she did take it personally. How could she not? For years, she had been the one to host holidays, birthdays, barbecues. She had cooked turkeys, baked pies, decorated the house with care. Family had always meant everyone together, her home at the center of it all. Now she was being gently pushed to the margins, told it was for her own comfort. but comfort felt a lot like exile. The following week, when Sarah stopped by, Evelyn tried to bring it up. "I felt left out," she admitted quietly. Sarah's smile was sweet, but her words cut. "Oh, Evelyn, don't think of it like that. We're just trying to take care of you. Sometimes it's easier for everyone if you rest instead of worrying about hosting or keeping up." Easier for everyone. The phrase echoed long after Sarah left. That night, Evelyn sat in her bedroom, the photo album spread across her lap. She flipped through the pages: Michael's childhood birthdays, family reunions, her husband carving the Thanksgiving turkey. The faces smiled back at her, frozen in time. She whispered to the photos, "When did I stop being part of the picture?" Her voice cracked, but no one heard. The next morning, she made herself a promise. She would pay closer attention. She would stop ignoring the unease, the cracks widening around her. Because something was happening, and if she didn't face it now, she might vanish from her own life entirely. It was supposed to be a simple errand. Evelyn needed to replace her old washing machine. The repairman had said it would cost more to fix than to buy new, and she had saved for situations like this. Confidently, she walked into the appliance store, picked out a modest model, and handed over her card. Declined. Her stomach dropped. She tried again. Declined. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you have another way to pay?" Her cheeks burned as she dug through her purse, finally handing over her credit card. But even that didn't go through. Embarrassed, she muttered, "There must be some mistake. I'll come back later." She drove home, her mind racing. Something was wrong. The next morning, she called the bank. After a few minutes on hold, a woman answered. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, I see your account here, but according to our records, your son Michael is listed as the primary account holder now. You'll need to speak with him about transactions." Evelyn's hand went cold around the receiver. "Primary account holder? That can't be right. It's my account." "I understand, ma'am, but the documents we have on file grant him power of attorney. He has authority over your finances." Power of attorney. The words clanged in her head, sharp and final. Her breath came shallow. "I never agreed to that. I just signed some papers he gave me." "I'm sorry," the woman said gently, "but that's what those papers were." Evelyn hung up, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Power of attorney. It wasn't just convenience. It wasn't just help with bills. She had signed away control of her own life. When Michael stopped by that evening, she confronted him. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "The bank says you're the primary. They wouldn't let me use my own money." Michael's expression didn't falter. He set his coat on the chair, speaking in that calm, practiced tone. "Mom, it's all for your protection. With power of attorney, I can make sure everything runs smoothly. You don't need to worry about a thing." "I do worry," she snapped. "You've taken my freedom from me." Sarah, who had followed him in, placed a hand on Evelyn's arm. "No one's taking anything from you, Evelyn. We're just making sure you're safe. You shouldn't have to deal with all the stress of money and paperwork." Evelyn pulled her arm back. "Safe? You've locked me out of my own accounts. You've made me a stranger in my own home." Michael sighed heavily, as if she were the unreasonable one. "Mom, you're overreacting. We're trying to help. You're not as young as you used to be. Mistakes can happen." The words cut deeper than any knife. Not as young as you used to be. For decades she had built this life, paid the bills, cooked the meals, raised him single-handedly after his father died. She had been capable then. And now, suddenly, she was mistake-prone? She looked at him, her only child, and saw not care, but calculation. "You lied to me," she whispered. Michael didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk, staring at the neat stack of bills she had always paid herself. The checkbook lay closed, the pen unused. Her independence, once steady as breath, had been signed away with a stroke of ink. She thought back to her husband's voice years ago. "Never sign anything you don't read, Evie. Promise me." She had promised, and she had broken it. Not out of ignorance, but out of trust. And that trust had been betrayed. Her hands shook as she pulled out her journal, the one she had begun keeping after the first exclusions. She wrote furiously, words spilling like wounds onto the page. "Today I learned the truth. I have no control. I am a guest in my own life. My son holds the keys to everything. Money, decisions, even my freedom. They told me it was love, but it was theft. Quiet, smiling theft." When she put the pen down, tears blurred her vision. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Not rage. Not yet. Resolve. If they had locked her out, she would find. She replayed Michael's words. "You're not as young as you used to be. Mistakes can happen." For years, she had seen her age as something graceful, something earned. Now, in her son's voice, it had been turned into a weapon. She refused to let it end like this. That afternoon, she began to dig. She pulled out the stack of bills, letters, bank statements, every piece of mail she had saved. For hours, she organized them into piles: mortgage, utilities, bank accounts. She noticed patterns she had missed before. Her name shrinking on documents, Michael's appearing larger, stamped with authority. She took out her journal and began recording everything: dates, conversations, transactions she couldn't access. Her handwriting was shaky but determined. For the first time, she wasn't just grieving, she was preparing. The following week, Evelyn invited her old friend Margaret over. They had known each other since high school, shared decades of secrets, losses, and laughter. Over tea, Evelyn poured out the story: the papers, the bank, the barbecue she hadn't been invited to. Margaret listened, her brow furrowing. "Evie, this isn't just family tension. This is financial abuse." Evelyn flinched at the word. "Abuse? He's my son." "That doesn't matter," Margaret said firmly. "I've seen it before. They convince you it's for your good, but it's about control. You need to talk to a lawyer." The thought made Evelyn's stomach twist. Lawyers were expensive, intimidating, and how could she go up against her own child? But Margaret squeezed her hand. "You're not powerless. You still have rights. Don't let them take the rest of your life." That night, Evelyn sat in her bedroom staring at her reflection in the mirror. She saw the lines of age, yes, but also the eyes of a woman who had once raised a son alone, held 2 jobs to keep food on the table, buried her husband, and kept going. She wasn't weak. She wasn't forgetful. She was tired, yes, and she was still Evelyn Carter. The next morning, she picked up the phone and called a lawyer whose name Margaret had given her. His voice was steady, practical. "Bring everything you have," he said. "We'll go through it together." Evelyn gathered her files, her journal, her trembling courage. She placed them carefully into a worn leather bag, the same one she had once used to carry Michael's school supplies when he was small. It struck her, with a pang, how the circle had twisted. Once she had carried his life in her hands. Now she was carrying the evidence of how he had tried to steal hers. At the lawyer's office, the air smelled of paper and ink. Mr. Harrison, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, spread out her documents across the desk. He adjusted his glasses, reading in silence for a long time. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Carter, this is serious. You did sign over power of attorney, but it can be revoked. If you can prove you're mentally competent, and that you were misled." "Mentally competent?" she echoed, heat rising in her cheeks. He nodded gently. "It's the standard. Families often argue that older relatives weren't of sound mind. But if you can demonstrate otherwise, you can take back control." Evelyn sat straighter, her jaw tight. "Then that's what I'll do." For the first time since signing those papers, her voice didn't shake. Mr. Harrison leaned back, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. Then let's get to work." That evening, Evelyn returned home with a folder of instructions, a plan of action, and something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. She sat at her kitchen table once more, opened her journal, and wrote, "Today, I began to fight. They may have taken my signature, but they will not take my spirit. I will not fade quietly. I will not be erased." The pen scratched across the page, firm and steady. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't just a victim. Evelyn had just returned from the lawyer's office, her folder of notes tucked neatly under her arm, when she saw the envelope on the kitchen counter. Her name was typed in bold letters across the front. Inside was a summons. Michael and Sarah were challenging her attempt to revoke the power of attorney. Their claim was simple and cruel. Evelyn Carter was no longer mentally competent to handle her own affairs. Her knees buckled and she gripped the counter for support. Mentally incompetent. The words were heavy, poisonous, as if her years of resilience, her sharp memory of recipes, her journal filled with details, her conversations with neighbors and friends, all of it could be erased with a single accusation. That evening she called Margaret. Her friend's voice was steady. "This is exactly what abusers do, Evie. They twist love into leverage, and when you resist, they call you crazy. Don't let them win." The following week, Evelyn sat across from Mr. Harrison in his office, papers spread between them. "They'll argue you're forgetful," he said. "They'll say you can't manage your finances, that you're vulnerable. We'll need to prove otherwise." "How?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With evidence," he replied. "We'll arrange a cognitive evaluation. We'll bring witnesses, neighbors, friends, even your doctor, to testify to your clarity." The word clarity steadied her. A week later, she sat in Dr. Moore's office, a calm woman with kind eyes who specialized in elder evaluations. For 2 hours, Evelyn answered questions, recalling lists of words, solving simple math problems, explaining financial terms, even drawing a clock face with the hand set at a specific time. When it was over, Dr. Moore smiled. "Mrs. Carter, you are sharper than many people half your age. You have nothing to fear from these results." Still, Evelyn's stomach twisted at the thought of choosing a navy blue dress her husband had once loved, a pearl necklace that steadied her trembling hands. She walked into the courtroom with Margaret at her side and Mr. Harrison guiding her forward. Michael and Sarah sat across the room, their expressions smooth, unreadable. For a moment, Evelyn's heart cracked. Her son, the boy she had raised alone, now standing against her as if she were an enemy. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Michael's lawyer spoke first, his words polished. "Your Honor, Mrs. Carter is a beloved mother, but she has shown signs of decline. Forgetfulness, confusion, financial irresponsibility. My clients have simply stepped in to protect her from herself." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Lies, all of it. But lies spoken with confidence sound dangerously like truth. When it was her turn, Mr. Harrison stood tall. "Your Honor, Mrs. Carter is not only competent, she is the victim of manipulation. She signed papers under the impression they were for convenience, not realizing they stripped her of control. Her son and daughter-in-law exploited her trust. We will show you she is clear-minded, capable, and deserving of her independence."
Then came the testimonies. Dr. Moore presented her evaluation, detailing Evelyn's flawless results. Mrs. Carter demonstrates strong memory, reasoning skills, and financial understanding. There are no indicators of decline. Mr. Summers, the hardware store owner, testified about Evelyn's careful shopping habits and sharp conversation. Her neighbor, Linda, spoke of Evelyn's gardening, her bookkeeping, her active participation in community events. Finally, it was Evelyn's turn. She stood slowly, her knees weak, but her back straight. She looked at the judge, her voice steady. "I may be 72 years old, Your Honor, but I am not incompetent. I cook my meals, I pay my bills, I keep records of every conversation, every penny spent. The only mistake I made was trusting my son more than myself." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, but she lifted her chin. "I signed those papers because I believed they were an act of love. Instead, they were an act of theft. I am here not just to reclaim my accounts, but to reclaim my dignity." The courtroom was silent. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter." As she sat down, she caught Michael's eyes. For a brief second, she saw something flicker there. Not remorse, but recognition. He knew she wasn't broken. He knew she was fighting back. And for the first time, Evelyn didn't look away. The courtroom was hushed, every shuffle of paper, every cough echoing through the high ceilings. Evelyn sat stiffly in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap, waiting. The testimonies had been given. Her competence had been proven. Yet doubt still pressed on her chest. Judges were human. They could be swayed. And Michael's lawyer had spoken so smoothly, painting her as fragile, forgetful, unstable. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "I have listened carefully to both sides," he began, his voice low but steady. "On one hand, I hear the concerns of Mr. and Mrs. Carter regarding their mother's well-being. On the other, I see evidence of a woman who is lucid, capable, and organized." Evelyn's breath caught. The judge paused, glancing down at the papers before him. Then his gaze lifted to her. "Mrs. Carter, you are not incompetent. You are not incapable. You are, in fact, remarkably clear-minded and articulate. The court finds that you signed the power of attorney under misleading circumstances. That document is hereby revoked. Control of your finances and property is fully restored to you." The gavel struck wood, sharp, whispering, "You did it, Evie. You won." Across the room, Michael's jaw tightened. Sarah leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but his eyes stayed fixed on Evelyn. His expression was no longer calm or confident. It was dark, angry, defeated. He had underestimated her. Evelyn stood slowly, her legs trembling, but her back straight. She walked out of the courtroom with Margaret at her side, each step lighter than the last. For weeks she had carried the weight of fear, shame, betrayal. Now with one ruling she carried something new: freedom. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. Evelyn inhaled deeply, the chill filling her lungs. She hadn't realized how shallow her breaths had been until now. Mr. Harrison joined her on the steps. "You were extraordinary in there, Mrs. Carter." She smiled faintly, wiping her eyes. "I didn't feel extraordinary. I just felt tired." He chuckled. "Tired but brave. And sometimes that's enough." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the courthouse doors. Michael and Sarah emerged a moment later, their heads bent close, speaking in low tones.
When Michael's eyes met hers across the steps, there was no warmth. For a long moment, mother and son stared at one another. Decades of love, sacrifice, and shared history stretched between them, and yet it felt like a canyon that could never be crossed again. Evelyn didn't flinch. She turned away. Later that evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her journal open. The pages were crowded with her handwriting: pain, fear, confusion, determination. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Today the truth was spoken aloud. I am not broken. I am not incompetent. I am not invisible. My son tried to silence me with paper and lies, but I still have my voice. And today the world heard it." She closed the journal, her hands steady, the quilt draped over the couch. They weren't relics of a life slipping away. They were pieces of her story, still unfolding, and no one, not even her own son, would write it for her. The first thing Evelyn did was change the locks. She stood on her porch while the locksmith worked, the sound of metal clicking and turning oddly satisfying. When he handed her the new keys, she closed her fingers tightly around them, as if they were a lifeline. Her house was hers again, not just legally, not just on paper, but in truth. The next step was the bank. She opened a new account in her own name, free from Michael's reach. She withdrew her funds, watching the numbers transfer back where they belonged. The bank manager shook her hand warmly. "It's good to see you taking control, Mrs. Carter." Taking control. She liked the sound of that. Back at home, Evelyn gathered every document Michael had touched. Bills, statements, even the cursed folder he had once slid across her kitchen table. She placed them in a box and carried it to the attic. She didn't want to look at them anymore, not out of fear, but because they no longer defined her. That evening, she brewed herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing against the dusk. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for a knock on the door, a phone call, or permission to act. Her life was her own. A few days later, Michael called. She let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Mom." His voice was clipped, almost rehearsed. "I think we should talk. We got off on the wrong foot with all of this." Evelyn's grip tightened on the receiver. She pictured his face in the courtroom, the coldness in his eyes. "I don't think so, Michael," she said calmly. "There's nothing left to discuss." Silence stretched. But I will no longer be your victim." Before he could reply, she hung up. Her hand shook for a moment, but then steadied. The line was drawn. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn filled her days with small joys. She joined a local book club, her laughter mingling with new friends over coffee and stories. She planted tulips in her garden, their green shoots promising color when spring came. She baked pies not for others but for herself, savoring each slice without waiting for approval. She even took a bus trip to the coast, walking barefoot along the shoreline, the wind tangling her hair. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, vast and free. She felt small, but not powerless. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. At night, she returned to her journal. On the last page, she wrote, "They asked me to sign away my life. I almost did. But today, I signed it back to myself. Freedom is not always loud. Sometimes, it is quiet as a locked door, firm as a steady hand, soft as a morning sun through the window. I have chosen peace. I have chosen me." She closed the journal gently, setting it on the shelf. The house was silent, but it was a beautiful silence, not emptiness, but space. Space she could fill with whatever she wanted: music, laughter, quiet.
As she climbed into bed, the moonlight spilled across her quilt, silver and soft. She breathed deeply, letting the weight of the past months dissolve. Her son might never return to her with love. That chapter was closed. But Evelyn Carter was no longer waiting at the edges of her own story. She was writing the next page herself, and in that choice, she was finally free.